data science related area. So with that assumption, I proceed further. And as a common acknowledgement, the content, whatever I present in this presentation, most of them have taken from the course materials of Professor Andrew Ng and some other resources available in the internet. So, if you see the history, you could have seen this diagram. Many might have, my previous speakers also might have shared a similar diagram like this, where you can see the root of all this data science, soft computing, or all these things is basically artificial intelligence, which basically means trying to impart we try to impart some knowledge to the system just like as a human, we do have certain intelligence levels, and we get that intelligence by as we grow from the childhood, as we understand the environment, as we perceive the things, as we speak, as we watch the things, and as we listen to how we acquire the knowledge. Similarly, if the system which is in some terms more powerful than a human in performing the heavy calculations without any error, then if such a powerful system has some knowledge, then how the system can behave? That's the basic question arised, and that leads to the invention of a great subject, artificial intelligence, where it tries to impart knowledge, so that what happens is the humans, how we think and make some decisions, how we derive some deductions or interpretations, the whole artificial intelligence try to model such human behavior. So some particular courses, like if you see artificial neural networks, this exclusively simulation of a human brain, how the human brain is going to communicate to its organs and how the brain thinks. If you get able to simulate that behavior of human brain, that is nothing but through artificial neural networks we can do that. Like this, these fields, interrelated fields for all these things, the mother is artificial intelligence. And machine learning in particular, if you see, the basic difference between the artificial intelligence and machine learning is it will try to improve the performance of the tasks given compared to what artificial intelligence can do. Machine learning can even do better than that by having different models, and all these models are basically rely on simple statistical analysis and statistical techniques. Thereby, you can get some model generation can be made for complex problems. Then the next one is the subset of this is the deep learning, where what a machine learning cannot do that can be done through the deep learning, in the sense if the data is small, then no need to go for machine learning, deep learning. But if the data is increasing in tons and tons of data, if the data increase is in exponential, then the machine learning cannot be sufficient enough to hold and do process on that huge amount of data. So at that time, you have to go for deep learning mechanisms, where it can cater to vast or huge amounts of the data. So this simple distinction should be known to all of you when you do any course or anything, any research on these areas. Means you have to know whether for every damn small problem do you need to go for deep learning? Certainly not. When you can go for a deep learning is you should have very huge amount of data, then only deep learning is required. And such data, you can get it in speech signals, image signals, and videos very abundantly than in any other domain. That's why these are basically models to do the task on speeches, images, and videos. So what is machine learning? So in the olden days, if you see, we try to automate a particular system. Means we want to generalize, make some software for a particular concern, either like a grocery shop or any other work, even in the college, since all of you are, I think, faculty or the research scholars. So all of you know that you are in your system, the every sort of activity, academic activity or the administrative activity, if they can, one can automate it, that we call it as, means computerize all the events and activities, we call this as an automation. So machine learning is automating that automation, we call it as the machine learning. So that the computers will try to model the system using the data being given, and they keep improving the performance of the model as the time progresses. So the traditional programming, if you take, the requirements and the data are being given to the human, and the human will develop a program, and then that program is fed into the computer and takes input and gives some output. Whereas in machine learning generating the program, in the sense we are just trying to develop a model through the machine learning concepts using some libraries. So the requirements and data remains the same, whereas the model is generated through a machine learning, and that model is being fed into the computer as an input, and you get some output. So the basic definition given, there are many definitions available for machine learning. One simple definition is given by Tom Mitchell. What he says is a program or a computer program is set to learn from an experience E in with respect to some class of tasks T if its performance at task in T E. So if you see, what is that task, what is that performance, and what is the uh, experience, if you see. So for example, take the task as riding a cycle. So all of you might know how to ride a cycle. And when you start learning that, if you recollect your experience, first time you may feel fear and you don't know how to control it, and you can't even do good pedaling, and you will fall, right? And if you keep practicing it, but if you give up on the, then you can't learn anything. But we don't give up in general, and we try to learn that by repeatedly practicing it. First time I fall, second time I fall, third time I fall, fourth time I will not fall, but I could able to control little bit. Then fifth time I could able to move that even more distance a little than the previous one. Like that, your experience in handling the cycle gets improved with respect to the number of attempts you give. So the experience, what you gain is how much the as the number of attempts increases, your experience will also increase. And the performance, if I see how many times I fall and how much distance I cover, if I take these two as a metrics, then initially I'll fall, I'll not cover even a 0.1 meter, okay, and I fall one time, second, or first in a time duration of 5 seconds, I may fall one time or two times. Then at some point of time, I will not fall and I'll cover more than a kilometer or 2 kilometers depending on my stamina. So this is how, if you take this task as riding a cycle, the experience you get it is the number of attempts you make, and the performance can be made by some known metrics like relevant to this particular task. Similarly, take another example. Okay, I think that screen is gone. Okay, no problem. We'll see one. So if I take playing a game, playing a chess game as a task, and experience is playing a number of games. Daily I play some 10 games or something like that. If I assume it, and the performance, how many times I won, how many times I lost. Initially, when I start with a beginner, I may lose, but if I want to learn it, I don't bother about how many times I lost, but as I play more number of games, my experience in how to play the chess game will improve, and at some point of time, I try to get winning track. So this is everything in the day-to-day activity. If you see, everything is basically, you can consider it as a task, and the experience you gain over doing the task and what is the performance. Similarly, when you do cooking, so first you may not know how to cook, then experience again here, number of times you cook, means number of attempts you make it, and the performance is how delicious the food is. If you make some delicious quotient and say that I will give in a 10-point scale, I want to measure. Initially, I put 0 for my own dish, then slowly I put a 1, okay. Then at some point of time, I become like acceptable dish. And then slowly I improve the performance and score 8 or 9 or something, then I become master in cooking. So every task, if you correlate it in the way you do the things, they are nothing but the human brain's tendency, and the human brain in general is every task, he will improve his performance based on the experience. And as a faculty, we also do the same thing. So if I teach machine learning first time, then I may not deliver the best output. But if I teach the machine learning regularly for a period of 4 to 5 years or more, then the essence I can give it in very easily and very efficiently. So this is how the human experiences the same way we can also make the model think and work like a human, experience the data over the repeatedly by modeling it, and then we try to measure its performance based on some statistical techniques. So another definition given by another scientist, Simon, is learning denotes the changes in the system that are adaptive in the sense that they enable the system to do the task or a task drawn from the same population more efficiently and more effectively next time. So almost in the same way, you are learning means as you do more number of attempts, you gain experience. That experience is calling it as a learning. And that learning on the same population, on the same task, if you repeat it, then your output will be efficient next time. You can deliver it efficiently. So this learning, whatever we call it is equal to generalization. Means once I know how to cook, and I just change the vegetables or the other ingredients, and I can make varieties of dishes. This is what a generalization we can make it. So the task here for a system is, as it is been exposed to a particular set of data continuously, and it tries to understand the patterns in that and make some generalizations over that data over a period of time. So if you see the history, some main milestones in the machine learning area, in 1950, Alan Turing has created the Turing test to determine if a computer has a real intelligence. So in order to pass the test, the system has to fool the human, believing it is also a human. Then in 52, Arthur Samuel wrote the first learning program for IBM, that is for to play the game of checkers. And in 57, we have the first perceptron model given by Rosenblatt in the neural network to try to simulate the human brain. Then in 67, after 10 years of time, the nearest neighbor algorithm was written to identify and search for the patterns available in the given data. Then as it slowly progresses, people started making some new models and programs that can able to simulate the human's behavior. And in 85, you got the first NetTalk program, which learns to pronounce the words the same way as a baby does. And in 90s, you have this data-driven approach. And in 1996, IBM has created a system, computer called Deep Blue, to beat the then old chess champion Garry Kasparov. And in 2006, we have this deep learning era has started. First time, Geoffrey Hinton has coined the term to explain new algorithms that let the computer see and distinguish the objects and text in images and videos. Then in 2010, Microsoft Kinect can able to track 20 human features at a time over a video that has a 30 frames per second. Then in 2011, you have the IBM's Watson beating its human competitor at a Jeopardy game. Then 2011, Google started developed a Google Brain using a deep neural network. In 2012, again they designed Google's XLab developed a machine learning algorithm to browse the YouTube videos and to identify the videos that contain some respective object of interest. Then as it progresses, you have in every year, there is something or the other new thing that has been concatenating to the era of this machine learning and deep learning. So like this, this is another famous grand DARPA challenge where unknown vehicle will take the route and reaches the destination without any driver in hand. That is for unmanned vehicles. So all these things based on the sensors, it tries to process the path and then makes the decisions apparently dynamically and reach the destination. So all these things, basically if you see the basic difference, once again, the human, he learns from the experience. Whereas a robot, if you design, it just follows the instructions given. Whereas an intelligent robot, it learns from the data. And what we are doing in machine learning or deep learning is we try to develop some models that behave like an intelligent robot and that learns from the data. So this I already done, the chess program. Okay. And if you see the different applications of the machine learning, you can see for weather prediction, and also you can classify the mail as a spam or a general mail, or I want to make some stock predictions or similarity determinations, or collaborative filtering, or finding the pattern, speech recognition, natural language processing, recommendation systems. Every damn field you see, you can find a machine learning application in that respective domain. So this is one simple example of a handwritten digit recognition through simple machine learning algorithms. So in a nutshell, if you see the craze for the machine learning and deep learning today, because of thousands of machine learning algorithms, and everyone has its own special characteristics available. And if you see in the general structure of any machine learning algorithm, it has three major components. First one, representation of the data, then evaluation and optimization. So people will spend lot of time in understanding the data and represent the data. Means you have to make the data sit over certain model whichever you choose for, whichever you have selected for. And to do that, you can't just simply take, you have so many models there, simply you can't take some model and put the data over there. You have to study what the data is all about, what sort of a data it is, what sort of values it has, how many attributes it has, and how this data is evolving over a period of time. So most of the time, when the whole task, if you take it as a time 100%, then 70 to 80% of the time we spend only for representation of the data. And once the data can able to be represented in an efficient and elegant way, then evaluation and optimization can be done just like a fraction of a second. So for that representation, what are all the models available? From the decision trees, simple logic programs, or instance-based learning models, or Bayesian models, neural networks, or support vector machines, or ensemble models. Like that, you can just list out as many models as you have it in machine learning. Every model, if you see, they are being used to represent the data in that form. So if I take a decision tree, so I'm going to have a data available in the form of attributes and values, and that data I will try to put it in the form of a tree by choosing some attribute as the root and some other attributes as the child nodes to the root, and so on. I make a decision tree. And finally, my decisions will be based on the conjunction of the disjunction of the rules that have been generated from the decision tree over starting from every path that is from the root node to every leaf node. Similarly, any model, if you take the same data for a Bayesian model to apply for a naive Bayesian classifier and all. So what we do is we get the data and calculate the probabilities in that over the data and use the naive Bayesian model. So like that, the data, whatever is there, we have to see which model best suits for representing the data, and accordingly you have to spend a lot of time in analyzing the data to find a suitable representation. Then for evaluation, depending on the model of the data and depending on the type of the problem, you have a different evaluation metrics. Particularly if you are working on a classification, you can go for the accuracy, precision, recall, and all. And if you go for some sort of a naive Bayesian models and all, you can see the post probability function or the cost function and all. And if you see the support vector machines, then you can define the accuracy, margin, and all, cross entropy, all these things. Depending on the model, depending on the problem you have it, you can see some of the evaluation metrics to measure the performance of the model. And to do some optimization, either one can go for a combinatorial optimization using some greedy methods, or convex optimization using gradient descent algorithms, or linear programming where you can do some constrained optimization. And if you see the algorithms of the machine learning, you can do classification or categorization of those algorithms into two types, either by learning style or by similarity in some form, Means there exists some similarity among those algorithms. So with that similarity, we can categorize, or with respect to the style of learning, we can categorize. So what that exactly that learning means, when I say by learning style, what I mean by learning is understanding the high level cognition. So that once when you say that you learn something, how do you say that you learn something? When only you can understand the concept clearly and then able to represent that concept in a simpler way to some other people, and you perform some knowledge intensive inferences. Means once you understand something, you can able to make your own inferences from that whatever you learn from, and then make some adaptive and intelligent systems with that. And also you deal with once you know that, you know how to deal with messy or real world data that has so many issues, and what you do for to overcome that analytics. All these things a part of the learning we call. So the purpose of learning is you get some knowledge, and then using that knowledge you adapt to the systems, and then use that knowledge to make the decisions. So why to study this learning is for all these reasons. So with this understanding of what a learning is, let us see the grouping of those algorithms by learning style. So we have different learning styles. First one, we call it as supervised learning, where you have the data with the desired output. So you have been given the data and what the data is about, then what you have to do is fix a model. So that we'll see with an example little later. And unsupervised learning, you have the data, but no output is there. Then you means you have to find some hidden structures or hidden patterns that are existing in the data, that we call unsupervised learning. Then semi-supervised learning, you have some data, for some portion of the data you have output available, and for some portion you have no output. And for this portion, whatever you have the output, you apply a supervised learning algorithm. And for this data which has no output, you apply an unsupervised learning algorithm. And then to finally try to integrate the results into one. And the last type of learning is reinforcement learning, where the learner will try to interact with the system or the model through actions and rewards. This basically is highly helpful in control theory applications, navigating a robot or anything like an unmanned vehicle. All these control theory applications, you can use reinforcement learning. So this is how the classification tree of any machine learning. The first one is the supervised learning, then unsupervised learning, then semi-supervised learning, and then reinforcement learning. And again in semi-supervised learning, since it has the outputs, you can have a sub-classification. Depending on the type of the output, if it is a continuous output, then you can best suits for some regression problems. And if the output is categorical in nature, then that is used for classification. And in unsupervised learning, you have no output. So you can do what you can do is a clustering or make some associations among those patterns. And in semi-supervised, depending on for the output available, you can either go for a classification and clustering. So classification we do for the categorical output data, and for uncategorical output and means no output, we do the clustering. And in reinforcement learning, once again, either you can go for classification or you can use it for control applications. So in brief, if you see, machine learning is programming the computers using the data so that you can optimize it for a performance criteria. So machine learning relies on these three. One is it relies heavily on the statistics and some numerical algorithms particularly, linear algebra models and optimization models and all, and little bit on computer science, where it uses some data structures and programs to solve the machine learning problem very efficiently. So the other categorization is algorithms grouped by similarity. So accordingly, you have these sort of categories. Let us see one by one. So in the regression algorithms, you have a linear regression, logistic regression. Of course, this is the only regression which is used for the classification. The linear regression, we use it for the prediction, and also you have a stepwise regression, then locally embedded scatter plot smoothing regression, multivariate adaptive regression splines. All these are under the umbrella of regression algorithms you have. These two are the most popular among them. Similarly, instance-based learning, if you see, you have the k nearest neighbors, learning vector quantization, self-organizing map. All these are examples for instance-based learning. In instance means a particular data item, you can call. So if you have a data with n items, so I take a particular item and then try to put it over the hyperplane and try to fix and try to learn that, and then take the second item and so on. So all these things basically are instance-based learning. So the learning is done by instance. Instance means a particular data item of among the total number of data items you have. So these are most popular. Of course, LBQ is also popular. Then you have regularization algorithms. In that, Lasso is most popular one. Then we have many decision tree algorithms available, starting from iterative dichotomizer, classification regression tree, also called CART, KIDE, decision stump, and so on. Popular ones, these two are more popular, and nowadays people are also using KIDE decision trees. Then if you see the Bayesian algorithms, which are highly useful for association analysis. So what do you mean by some association? A simple example to understand the association is if you go to any supermarket, the owner of the supermarket, they will arrange those items in the supermarket in such a way that they will always try to tempt the buyers, customers. So unnecessarily we buy the things even though the requirement is not there. So if you go to the stationery section, you want to buy some pen, you buy a pen, also you buy some scale or pencil or something which is related, or a book, a fancy book, that is, all the stationery items are kept at one place to attract. So even if you don't need a book, you simply buy a book because the cover of the book is so good or attractive or something for some reason. Similarly, if you go to the other section, say snack section, all sort of snacks are put at one place, so that you put unnecessarily dump your basket with those items which are not required. So these are called associations. Means if I buy a pen, then most likely I buy a book is also, if it is nearby, then my mind will tempt me to buy the book. So this is what called association. So if you buy bread, then most likely you buy milk also. So this is what called association. So this association analysis, similarly, if you might have encountered even when you browse a page, people who have visited this page, in particular, you can see in shopping carts in Amazon or Flipkart, people who have watched this product also has watched these projects, or people who bought this one also purchased these things, something like that they give. All this we call it as association analysis, so that even if there is a requirement or not, the people try to tap the human brain to make the market and make profits for them. So Naive-Bayesian classifier or Gaussian Naive-Bayes or Bayesian network or Bayesian belief network, all these are very good Bayesian popular algorithms which are efficiently can do the association analysis. Then it comes to the clustering algorithms, k-means clustering algorithm, expectation maximization, all these clustering can be done. Means clustering is basically trying to group the similar items into one set and make the dissimilar items away from the set. Then association rule learning, if you see, you have a priori algorithm and a CLAT algorithm. And if you see the neural networks, you have perceptron, multi-layer perceptron trained with the backpropagation, or Hopfield network, or the radial-based function network, and so on. You have then similarly, deep learning algorithms, if you take a deep Boltzmann machine, deep belief networks, convolution neural networks, stacked encoders, and so on, you have different varieties of deep learning algorithms. Then dimensionality reduction means the data is basically large data you have. You want to make some features extract from the data, and you want to, for that, you want to reduce the dimension. That is what dimensionality reduction. So the famous dimensionality reduction algorithms are principal component analysis, linear discriminant analysis, and apart from two, the others also variants of PCA and LDA are most popular in doing the reducing the dimensions of the given data. And you have ensemble algorithms, different ensemble algorithms. You have listing out like boosting, ADA boost, gradient boosting, all these basically categories of either boosting or ADA boosting. ADA boost classifiers variants are these, and bagging is another algorithm. Random forest is another algorithm which is very popular. Similarly, you have different sets of other algorithms which doesn't fit into any of these categories, like feature selections, algorithm accuracy evaluations, and performance measures, and so on. So at this point, I just want to take a small break, and if any one of you have any questions, you can please ask me. Sometimes the current slides are not visible. Okay. So if you have any queries at this point, I'm ready to take, so that I'll go to the next part.
Yes, sir. Anybody have doubts? You can raise your hand, or you can ask directly. Mm, Slides are visible, but it may be as there is no problem regarding the slides visibility. There's some query is there. Sir, either bagging algorithm or some modified classifier will give better results.
Yeah, depending on the ensemble, whatever you want to do, you can go for these bagging algorithms, which are good. ADA boost is also good, and you have random forest is even powerful.
Sir, I think no more questions.
Yeah. So I further continue with that,
Yes, sir.
and
Yes. Some
uh,
more is there, sir. You can see chat box. Small question. Difference
between
between
forward and
forward and
backward.
backward propagation.
Anyway, I will come to that a little later. Who is that asked? Manit sir, I'll just come back to that little later. I used ADA boost, but results not up to the level. May I know the reasons? It depends on the data, what sort of a problem you are using, Manikandan sir. In a generic sense, ADA boost will try to give better results. Cardiac data set, okay.
Manikandan, sir, you can ask.
Yeah, it's a cardiac data set. Means, are you doing a classification, or what exactly your problem there on the data set is? What is the objective? classification only. Okay, first, basically, when you want to go for ensemble learning, why the purpose of going for ensemble learning itself is to improve the accuracy levels. Means in the traditional classifiers you take like support vector machines or neural network models or decision trees, you are getting some accuracy and you are not satisfied with that accuracy, then go for ensemble learning, where you try to mix a set of classifiers. That is a simple way to do. Or you can go for these AdaBoost and random forest algorithms. But if you, XGBoost, the variants of the AdaBoost. So if they are also not giving a good result, either one assumption, one interpretation, what we can make is your data is very complex in nature, or the model is not undergoing learning properly. Either of these can be the reason. Another message from Ajit Shenoy. Is there any theoretical justification or proof available to say that any machine learning model works good for any specific problem, or it is just based on experimental results and based on data set considered? Very good question. Okay, let me answer that first. So the question is there any theoretical proof that how the model works, right, Ajit Shenoy?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That is my question.
Okay. So let's take it with an example. I take let us say some classification I want to do. Okay. Here itself I have that slide. Okay. Let me just introduce the classification and I'll come back to your question, Ajit Shenoy, sir. So,
okay, sir. Thank you.
If you say a supervised learning, particularly a classification, so we have the data labeled under two attributes. One is tumor size and one is age. And we want to see whether based on the tumor size, whether we want to predict whether the given data pertains to a malignant cancer or a benign cancer. These are the two types of breast cancer available existing for, and people, many women suffer with either of these cancers if at all, if they get affected. Okay, so if you do analyze that every data point here represented is a point representing a person. So if you have around 10 people, let us say for every 10 people who got this disease, unfortunately, and if you measure this, if you take the data, one based on the age and based on the tumor size, if you see, and if the size is smaller and the age is this, if you take this plot, then one can make a discriminant decision saying that if the tumor size is large in size and if the age is beyond this threshold, then it is most likely that it is malignant. Otherwise, it is benign. Like that means benign cancers, the people, the size of the tumor is very small compared to malignant cancer. And this usually get for people with low age. This is what a basic assumption we could able to draw from the data which is plotted. So one can able to draw a decision boundary, something like this, and try to classify that if at all, if any new person comes in, and if that person's data falls into one side of this line, we say that the person may have the malignant cancer. Otherwise, this is benign cancer. So take another example to classify the given fruit as apple or banana. So if you want to, if you have been given around 50 apples and 50 bananas, and ask you to make a model that classifies this data. So when you want to do this, when you want to extract some features, since you have these sort of images being given, so what we see is the simple one feature that discriminates this data is color, right? If the color is for apple, we say red, and for banana, it is yellow in color. So if I see the color, then I make a prediction. This is my model, simple model. So if the color is red, then the fruit is apple. Else, if the color is yellow, then the fruit is banana. This is what my discriminant or the prediction made. So accordingly, if I have 100 fruit images, I will take 60 or 70 images for training and 40 or 30 images for testing. And what I do is, let us say I split it into 60-40 ratio. In that, so this is for training and this is for testing. Okay. So in this 60, again take, if I take all 50 apples and 10 banana, my model may not give a good result. So I should have a uniform distribution, say 30 apples I took it and 30 bananas I took it. And the rest of the 20 apples and 20 bananas I use for classification. So every time when you measure, see this here, simply I wrote red and yellow. But in general, we give some numerical value depending on the pixel value. We try to give this value. Every red may not have a same pixel value, and every yellow may not have a same pixel value. Accordingly, we may get some error, right? So when I take this, my performance will be based on how my model is going to, after looking at all these 60 fruits, the model is able to understand what is an apple and what is banana just based on the numerical values for the red and apple alone, red and yellow alone, not by looking at, because it has no eyes that we have to accept it, right? And now if I give 20 apple red values and 20 banana yellow values, that may be different or maybe same like these 60 red and apple yellow values, then it is able to correct, predict out of the 40, let us say, it could able to make predictions correctly for 35 and wrong predictions for 5. Means these 5 maybe the bananas have been classified as apples or the other way around. So my accuracy, I can say that out of the 40, 35 apples have been classified properly. Then I calculate this percentage accordingly. So I'll say to, so around 86%, I say that my accuracy is, because I have made some wrong assumptions on the 5 items. So I am not satisfied with this. I go for a different model. Means my model, which is basically dependent on this attribute feature, is not sufficient to put me into highest accuracy. Maybe the data partition is wrong, or maybe the attribute is wrong. Accordingly, we can try to interchange or make some more complexity into the model by adding some more features, something we do to improve the performance. So if I come back to Ajit's question, like how do the theoretical justification or proof. So when you do this classification, for example, for the same problem, when I make a graph between, let us say, I try to, first I have made some model M1 and I got some accuracy, say 80, and this is the models versus accuracy. let us say I got an 86% of accuracy, and I have gone with the second model. My accuracy has increased to around 89%, and my model M3 further increased, and at some model MI I could able to get some maximum, say 97% of accuracy, and this accuracy remains the same for my further models. I am not able to get any improvement. My graph is get saturated at this time. This is what the maximum I can get with the available data. So this itself is a kind of proof that this model, whatever I have tested with the models which have reached the maximum, would able to do, this is the best you can expect it from a machine learning model. This itself is like a proof, not a theoretical proof, but there are theoretical proofs also. You can deduce it by theoretically defining the loss functions and trying to use the concepts. So even this error or this misclassification, you can call it as a loss function and try to minimize this loss function as possible as you can, and say you can give a theoretical proof also. But generally people do not have that much of mathematical knowledge. People who are working on these areas, they know simple mathematics only. So they try different models and say this is what I can, and go with that. But you can give a theoretical proof also. And the other question, that is forward propagation and back propagation. If you see, let us take the same example. After this, I have got this model only works for this type of fruits. Later, I changed my data. I means I have a different set of apples. So we have green apples also, and we have green bananas also available, right? So if I change my data set, then certainly this model, whatever is being generated based on red apples and yellow bananas, will not work at all for green apples and green banana. And I want to have, I need to develop a different model for that. And let us assume that in the second trial, I have red apples and red bananas. I hope you know that in southern India, particularly in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, you get red bananas, and you have yellow bananas and green bananas, green apples, like this, different varieties of it. So you can't rely on the color alone. You need to have so my first feature may be color, and my second feature may be the shape of the fruit, and my third feature may be the weight of the fruit, something like that. I take some combinations, and if my color is red, and if my shape is circular, and if my weight is, let us say, around 40 grams, then I can say that this particular combination leads to an apple. Something like that deductions I make it. Okay. So if I take a neural network particularly, so my features are 3 features I have. So I represent 3 neurons, and my class is there are only 2 classes, either apples or bananas. So in the output layer, I put one node to represent either 0 or 1, indicating either it is apple or banana, and we'll have some around 4 neurons in this hidden layer. So this is the input layer, hidden layer, and the output layer. And you know that these are the simple feed-forward network. We are giving it with all the connections, and you have, I'm not drawing all the connections, and it will give the output. Sorry, this is not there. Only one. neuron in the output layer, and it gives some output. Okay. So now what we do is, let us say this time we have around 500 data samples we have, out of which I have used 400 for training and 100 for testing. So out of these 400 fruit images, we are writing for every fruit, we have a three-dimensional vector we have that representing the first element in that vector having some value for the color and having some value for the shape and having some weight which is in real value. So what we do is, I take the first item and these connections, the edges will have certain weights. And what we do is we take the first sample and propagate that through the network with the weights. With the weights will be chosen initially at random. And in every layer, I hope that you know the neural network concept, or otherwise I'll put a simple mathematical model. So the inputs will come, and what we do is we make a summation of these inputs and apply a activation function to get an output. So this neuron in this hidden layer will do the involve in computations. It will receive all the inputs from these all the three nodes. So all the three nodes, you have the input that comes here with some weights, say W11, W21, W31, representing that the first neuron connecting to the first hidden layer. So 1, 1. The second neuron in the input layer connecting to the first neuron in the output layer, W21. Like this, you get an input. So what we do here is, let us say the summation. So Xi's will be the inputs and Wi's will be the output. So you do the summation of all Xi, Wi, and then you apply that into an activation function to get some Y. And here, once again, this is also a computing neuron. So it receives this input, so you get Y1, Y1, Y2, Y3, Y4. And here, let us say your weights are V11, V21, V31, and V41. So output here, let us say OP equal to summation of Vi's into Yi's. And what we get is output cap prediction output equal to apply the activation on whatever the activation function you choose, and you get OP star, OP cap, that is the output. And this output we expect, so for this sample, first sample, let us say the first sample is apple and the output is 0, let us say, means we take the output apple for 0 and banana as 1. So I don't get the desired output because I don't get a 0, certainly because the weights are being chosen randomly. So what we do is there is a loss function, and my expected desired output is 0, and the actual output what I got maybe around 0.5 or something, because we normalize the values of the inputs. So we get a weight output also in the range 0 to 1 because of the activation function we use. And the error is, we take the error square in order to avoid this negative symbol and the positive symbol. So we get 0.25 is my error. And I want to reduce this. And the error has been generated only because of the randomly chosen weights. That they are the only parameters in that system. So what I do is the error, whatever has been done, I apply a backpropagation algorithm. Using that algorithm, what we do is adjust the weights that are connecting from hidden to the output, as well as adjust the weights that are connecting from the input to the hidden layer. And after doing this adjustment, this is what the weight adjustment being done in the backward direction. And in the forward direction, we take the second sample, and then with the modified weights, we once again proceed and calculate the output for the second sample. And for the second sample, what is the error you got? And like this, you try to finish all the 400 samples which you have taken for training. At the end of the 400 sample, you adjust the weights again So 400 times you have adjusted the weights. So they are certainly do not remember all these 400 patterns, but you have elapsed all these 400. So what we do is at this time we call this as one epoch. Means one cycle of the inputs we have done, and then we repeat the process once again. And what we do is for every epoch to epoch, I make a plot between the epochs and the mean squared error. So errors for the first sample is E1 square, and error for every sample I take it, error for the 400 sample E400 square, and I take the mean square error of mean of all these errors. For my first epoch, my mean square error is very large. And when I go for the second epoch, it will slightly reduce. And when I go for the third epoch, it slightly reduce. As I make around 100 epochs or so, it may slightly reduce and come and will not converge it to this, but runs parallelly. At this point, you can stop because there is no learning happens. You get a simple horizontal line that is coming. So you can stop this. So this forward propagation is only to evaluate, do the summation of the products, and the back propagation is to adjust the weights. I hope that I have answered the question whoever has raised that query. Meanwhile, I got some more queries. Yeah, Manit, sir, I hope that you understood the difference between forward and backward. Then how the convergence of deep learning models are done in a similar way. Once you do the accuracy levels and when you do the performance, at some point the learning will stop. At that point, you can say that the convergence has been reached. Okay. Is it mandatory to prove the convergence if someone proposes any new clustering or classification method? Means when you propose a new clustering algorithm or a new classification algorithm that contains basically two parts. Let me say, let me switch on my video also. So that any clustering or algorithm or any classification algorithm, if you propose it, the task of the algorithm is having two activities. One is learning and the second one is testing. And learning, till what time you have to do the learning is the most important question. So take an example, you are hungry now that it is becoming the lunch time, you are hungry, your hungry levels are increasing, right? And you go for taking some food at your place. So when do you feel like you have come to the stage where you can stop taking the food? Samiran sir, can you answer me? Is he there?
Is this Samiran? Sir, you can unmute and answer.
Okay.
Yes, repeat. He's asking.
Manit is asking to repeat. So when, at what point you can say that you can't take more food? When you feel like your stomach is full or about to full, at that point we stop taking the food, right? I think my connection is good, right, sir?
Yes, sir. Connect. Good, sir.
Yeah.
Good. Bye.
At some point, even if we do not wait till I feel myself full, my stomach is full, little bit full also. Sometimes if let us say I am in diet, take little bit and say that I have done, right? Means that fullness or that satisfaction comes at some point after you take the food, then you stop it. Learning also, learning basically means understanding of the hidden patterns available in the given data by the algorithm. And when it states that learning has done, means you are learning that graph, if you plot it, it becomes a flat line. Like in ECG, when a person is died, people in the movies, they show the flat line indicating that person has expired, right? So that sort of an expiry comes in that graph, saying that boss, however more you give the patterns, I am done, I cannot learn anything more. At that point, you have to stop. And another simple example, if I teach my session is 12 to 1:30, okay, due to my passion or due to something, I'm not terminating my session at 1:30. I'm keep telling up to 2 or 2:15, and at some point, you have to either simply quit the session. Since it is online, it is a very good choice for us to quit the session without asking any permission, or if it is an offline, you simply go away from the classroom. Means I can't take more than 1 hour a session. 1 hour means that's it. I can't extend, and when I extend it further, you are not in a position to understand and grasp. There is no point in for me to teach, and there is no point for you to sit and listen to. At that point, the saturation comes. The same is the case when the system is able to not learn anything more. That not able to learn anything more reflects in the graph, that expiry graph, a flat line. Means at that point, you can say that you can stop the convergence. You can stop and say that the network is converged. Yeah, overfitting and underfitting, that is another important concept. Simple, I'll put it in a very simple way. So I think all of you are faculty, right? When you say, when you teach some subject and ask the questions only on what has been taught, and the people also write only on based on what you have been taught, and if you twist a question, people are not able to answer it. This is what called, we'll say, generally the fitting problem. Okay, so in the training, when you train it and you want to do the performance on the training set also, means I have used 400 apples and I use those 400 apples for testing also, and for the testing, that 400 patterns are already seen by the model, so that is giving good answer for those 400 patterns, and I have 100 separate data set available, and for that set I am using it, it is not giving a good result. Then it is called the overfitting of the data. The other way around, you can have the underfitting also. Means you should not teach more, everything you should not teach. At the same time, you should not say also that I don't teach anything. The teaching or the content should be at the moderate level, so that individual has to improve that subject. So in the case of a classification or regression problem, if the data set has 150 plus predictor variables, then which model will be the good choice? Then in that case, I first ask you to do the dimensionality reduction first, and try to reduce the dimensions of the data, and then try to use some model. Okay, so I further proceed. Okay, this I skip. So the supervisor.
Sir, will you please repeat this, sir? Hello?
Yes, madam.
Will you please repeat?
Which one you want to?
This one. Just you told. Just.
Sir, last sentence, whatever you told.
That is, means if I have more variables, more attributes, then you can try to apply the dimensionality reduction to reduce the dimensions, that is the attributes. Predictor variable, okay. What? Any thumb rule for the number of predictor variable? No. Okay. So in supervised learning, decision trees, if you take then prediction of the future case, knowledge extraction, compression, outlier detection, all these are the different applications of the supervised learning. And in unsupervised learning what normally happens means you have no output. So the applications are, you can see document grouping, or in social network, clustering the similar people, how they have been connecting to each other, clustering the individual genes of the person, organizing the clusters. All these things are the typical examples of clustering. So supervised, you have a different labeled data. So one can simply draw a classifier like this to separate the patterns. Whereas unsupervised, you don't have labels. Every pattern looks like the same. So what you do is you have to make the groupings based on some proximity measures. So here the grouping is done based on how close they are. These four items are close to each other, whereas these are away from them, but within this group they are close to each other. Similarly, the association analysis I've already seen in the beginning, and the reinforcement learning, the reward giving, like particularly these things are used in developing games. So far we have used the model. What exactly is a model? Is that represents a compressed version of your data set, and it extracts knowledge from the data set, and it does not have any perfect performance, but it is useful for any approximation you make it on the data set. And to do the research in machine learning and data science, you should know little bit linear algebra, statistics, vectors, and probability theory. So the basic terminology, if you see in the machine learning, the examples which basically we mean are items or instances which are used for learning. Features, these are the attributes, the columnar attributes which are usually used to represent a vector. And labels means the values or the categories you assign it for the examples. So in the classification, these labels will have a specific category, whereas in a regression, if you are regression problem, these labels are basically estimations, so you have some real values. And training set means the items which you exactly use to train a learning algorithm. Validation sample, which you use it to tune the parameters of the learning algorithm. And test set, which you usually use to evaluate the performance of the learning algorithm. And a loss function, a function that measures the difference or the loss between the predicted label and a true label. There are many loss functions people can use. Simplest one is the least square error. Okay, or you can use a cross entropy, or any function you can define it. Hypothesis set, basically a set of functions that map the feature vectors to the set of labels. After all, what we do is once your learning has happened means that weights whatever you choose, that becomes your hypothesis that is trying to map it to the labels for the classification. Overfitting, someone asked, a state where the program predicts the values of the response variables for the training set accurately, but fail to predict the values for the test samples. As I told, I have 500 apples, in which 400 I use it for training and 100 I use it for testing. And I want to just test with these training samples, and I got the perfect result. But in this 100 testing, which is the key input for evaluating the performance, I don't get a much good accuracy. Then what is the underlying conclusion is that the model has overfitting happened. Means you should not use too much of data, you should not give for learning, you should reduce it. So usually 60% will be ideal to give, and 40% you keep it for testing. So the regularization can be applied it on the model to reduce this overfitting. That itself is a great theory. Someone asked it for theoretical proofs and all. You can do the regularization and reduce the overfitting and then evaluate the model using theoretical on theoretical lines. So this is the old model which we have seen: training, validation, and test. Nowadays, what we are doing is a cross validation. Means here the problem is how to split the data. This is the most important problem. Randomly you choose it, people may not accept it. So what we do is a cross validation or k-fold cross validation. So what we do here is, let us say with an example, I have a total data available. I try to put it into 5 groups or 10 groups like. Okay. And then what I do is I repeat the experiment as many times as I divided the number of data into number of groups. So in the first experiment, I take this as a validation set or the test samples, and these are the training samples. In the second experiment, I'll change this, my test sample will become the second piece. And in third, I take the third item as my test sample. And in the fourth experiment, I change once again. And the fifth, I change once again. So means what happens is I will give all the data in different experiments, in different forms. I give the total data by dividing the data into fold. Fold means a subset, that's it. Okay. And in every time when I repeat the experiment, I change my test data set to do the performance evaluation. And once I am done with all the experiments, then I take the mean performance. That will be the most accurate and the most recently used method to validate any classification result. And the ideal value to use to divide the data is k-fold. K equal to 10 is ideal value which is used. Means your data should be in a multiple of 10. Then only you can divide that into 10 different folds. Then another one which is used for performance measures is the confusion matrix, which is used to perform the visualize the performance. So it is basically for a simple two-class problem. Let us say my classes are positive and negative, or we can say yes or no, whatever it is. This is the confusion matrix. You can define it. So these are the actual classes, two classes, positive and negative, and these are my predictions, positive and negative. If my actual value is positive and my model also predicted positive, then we call it as a true positive. If my actual is positive but model has predicted negative, this is what called false negative. And if both are negative, this is true negative. And if my actual is negative but prediction is made positive, this is called false positive. So this is what we call it as type 1 error, and this is type 2 error. So take for example, a person has a cancer or not. Okay, so has a cancer is my positive and no cancer is my actual negative. And here also you say has a cancer and no cancer. And now see, a person who has a cancer but your model says no, this is type 1 error, which is negligible, you can say. And in this case, the person feels happy, and with that happy, he can live for more time. But this is the most dangerous situation. A person has no cancer and you model predicts that it has a cancer, then that is the dangerous error your model is doing. So always remember that this number should be as low as possible. And using this confusion matrix, we can derive some more metrics called precision, recall, accuracy, like this. These are the formulae. And also F measure, which I forgot to put, that is 2 times precision into recall by precision plus recall is another measure to combine these metrics. So a simple example. So this is how, so overall, if you see how a machine learning works, it starts with the data and try to fit a model, then validate the model, then test the model, then deploy the model, and then finally improve the model by fine tuning it. So this cycle, in this way, any machine learning algorithm works and improves its performance. And the issues in machine learning: what algorithms exist for learning general target functions from specific training examples? Okay, one can't give a sound answer. And how much training data is sufficient? This is also another question which no one can give a concrete answer. And what is the best strategy for choosing a useful next training experience, and how do the choice of the strategy changes the complexity? All these are basic issues which cannot have any solutions in a concrete manner. And other issues, what you have it. So at this point, I think I am done. So this is what, after looking at machine learning, even if the pattern is different, what I mean is you have any queries and it is understood for you. So if you have further any queries for me, let me see the, please say about deployment of a model little bit. Deployment, see, once you are done with the model, that final, if you say take a decision tree, the deployment is taking the underlying conjunction of the disjunction of the rules. And when you take a neural networks model, then your deployment is finding all the values of those weight matrices and put it at one place and you make a forward pass with that. That is what basically deployment means. Any other queries?
It is over. Is it over?
Yeah, there was one who has raised the hand.
Okay, okay. Yeah. Jaya, what is this? Jaya Pandian. Can
Trial
ask.
version.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir, you can ask. Sir, please ask.
Trial version.
Jaya Pandian.
Yes, please ask. How to deal with unstructured data?
Trial version.
What is this sound?
Yeah, please ask the question or put it in the chat box, Mr. Jayapandian.
Trial version.
Oh, some message is coming.
Samiran, that itself is another session. It needs to deal.
Trial version.
Sir, continue, no problem.
Yeah, to how to deal with unstructured data. It's itself another big session. Okay, can't be done in one simple answer, but what you can do is, what you can look for is basically when you say unstructured data, first I'll just tell 1 or 2 steps to deal with. If it is data is unstructured and it is represented in the form of an attribute and values, then first simple step is try to, if possible, put it into a structured form by making it by applying the taking off the gaps you have it in that unstructured data. That is one way. Or other way, you can use the unstructured data directly and try to make some clustering algorithms over that to understand what sort of patterns you have it in the data.
I think it is clear, sir. Some more questions, sir. One more is there.
Thank you, Dr. Meghanathan, sir. And what about the number of hidden nodes, either too large or too low? Okay, Jay Pandian, that is your question. In one book, they have given some vague proof saying that if you have the number of hidden neurons can be like more than around 1.2 times more than the number of neurons in the input layer. That is one vague explanation, one statement we made. But there is again no hardcore rule on how many neurons should be there. Okay. You can start with some minimum number and try to check with by increasing the number of neurons in the hidden layer, and then also you can increase the layers and all. Means simple thing is if you whole thing, if you take as the once you have the, if you see the linear programming or system of equations where you have number of equations and number of unknown variables. If the number of unknown variables are increasing, the complexity of the model increases. So the same thing, when you have a neuron, one neuron, you put it in the hidden layer and see how many parameters are going to affect that neuron. Means your parameter size will be increasing. That plays the basic limitation for the machine learning or the neural networks. Because when your parameters are increasing, then what happens is your learning time will increase and you need to have a high computing power resources required. And that's why people need to have GPUs when your data is increasing and you need to have a large number of parameters. The normal systems are not at all sufficient to deal with such computations. You need to have powerful resource. So mediocrely, you can have a reasonable number of parameters to solve the reasonable problems. If the problem is not reasonable, then it demands for deep learning, then you need to have a high computing resources also. And Google Colab, do not rely much. You can do the Google Colab for practicing, but every damn program you write it in the Google Colab, the Google has a mirror image of that. So when you are trying to put a new model or a new algorithm, then have a GPU system and have it all in your standalone system. So run it, execute it, and then publish it, that work. Otherwise, once people, we think that Google is doing a good service, but at the same time, it is also trying to tap all the good ones and make them as they may claim it. You can't even fight with them. Okay. So always use those things for the learning purposes, but not for experimentation purposes.
Okay, sir. I think no queries. So
I can just, you can mail me. I'll reply you back, Samiran sir.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, please share the PPTs to my mail ID, so I will forward to the participants.
Sure, sure, sure.
Sir, one more question is there. They are asking further reading about unstructured.
Yeah,
data.
I told Samiran send a mail to me so that I can send resources to him.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Very good session. We will wind
And
up.
thank you very much for giving an opportunity. Despite
Yes, sir.
the time the clock is crossing 1:30, people are having the and interactive. That itself is a great sign for my satisfaction, and that you have also great participants that really wanted to learn more. So
Yes, sir.
thank
Yes.
you for giving an opportunity, sir.
Yes, sir. We'll in future also we'll invite sir in so many
Sure.
workshops and FDPs.
Yeah.
Now I would like to invite Shabina Bhaskar, a research scholar, to deliver the vote of thanks. Madam, please.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, audible.
Good afternoon.
Audible.
Okay, for this section, we got an expert talk, the topic of machine learning concept by Dr. Chandramouli. Associate Professor, Central University of Tamil Nadu. So here, sir explained the concept of machine learning in a very simple manner. I think the researchers who are beginners in this field and also from other background other than computer science are more benefited from this session. So I think everyone got an insight into machine learning, different machine learning algorithm, dimensionality reduction algorithm, assemble algorithm, etc. And sir, you in a very simple manner explain the concept of classification, all that things. Very nice and informative session. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming here. And on behalf of this computer science department, Central University of Kerala, I express my sincere thanks to our speaker, Dr. Chandramouli, and special thanks to our participants for raising questions. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable time and valuable talk. We'll see you
Thank you,
later.
sir, for giving the opportunity. And I think I can leave, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Participants, please fill the attendance if anybody is pending. I'm posting the link in the chat box. So only 86 responses came for attendance. All of you fill the attendance. Posting the link on the chat box.
Next session is at 4 p.m., right?
Next session is at 4 p.m. All of you be ready be back by 3:55 p.m. Okay. If anybody is missing attendance, here the link is available. Okay. So in this chat box, link is available. You can fill it. Okay. We'll meet again in the 4 o'clock.